Foundation paper piecing is a fun way to use up those small scraps and make fun shapes that may be a lot harder to make with traditional piecing. Let me show you how to make this economy block with the foundation paper piecing method. This is also referred to as FPP. First, you'll want to get started by finding some templates. There are free ones online. Usually you can just search free FPP templates and you should come up with some results. If not, let me know. And like I said, this is called an economy block. It is an easy basic shape, but you could also try flying geese, a log cabin block, or just jump right into something more difficult if you'd like. Most FPP patterns will come with printing directions, so make sure to follow those. And then a lot of them come with different sizes of that same pattern too. I'm going to do this 3-inch economy block here. This one specifically printed 4 on one page, so these are 4 separate economy blocks. So I just roughly cut out one, and you don't have to cut perfectly around the edges here, but you can if you'd like. You'll see here we have the block in the center, and then there's a dotted line going around the outside. That is giving you a 1/4 inch seam allowance if you want to attach these blocks together. Then you'll notice there are numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Most patterns will come with numbers in the blocks, and you want to attach your pieces of fabric in order according to those numbers. If your pattern is a little more difficult, it might also have letters to indicate which color to be using so that you know you're putting the right colors in the right spot. But this one's very basic, just numbers here. I did just use regular printer paper to print this out. I know they make special paper. Sorry, I'm just going to keep doing it this way. When I don't have to buy even more materials, I don't do it. So I decided to start with this strawberry in the middle with this scrap I had. And I just needed to be big enough to cover that center square plus about a 1/4 inch on each edge. So I did cut this down to make it a little more manageable. If you have too much fabric or too big of scraps, they just kind of get in the way. So definitely cut them down to be a little bit smaller, but give yourself extra room, especially if you're a beginner. Then I made sure it is nice and pressed. So like I said, the strawberry is going to be the center of my block. So I'm just making sure here that it covers up that middle square, and then I have room around all of the edges. We're actually going to be putting it on the back, and then you're going to be sewing through the paper on the front. A light source will come really handy here. So you'll need your number 1 fabric and your number 2 fabric right away. Again, this piece is way larger than those triangles, so I cut it down. And so what you do with your number 1 piece is you flip this over, and so you shouldn't really see anything. This is where a light source will really come in handy. You can hold it up to a light. There are special light tools if you want. I actually have this light here that I use for filming a lot of my videos. So sometimes I bring it over and hold it on top, and I want to make sure that it's covering up all of those lines. Then I'm taking my number 2 fabric, and it's going to go on that triangle on top there, but we want to flip it so that the fabrics are right sides together, and both fabrics overhang the line where 1 and 2 meet by about a 1/4 inch, because you want to give yourself a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you get doing this at first, it really feels like kind of backwards and weird, but you'll quickly get the hang of it, especially if you practice the same shape over and over. So again, our fabrics are right sides together. The number 1 piece is in line with where I want it to be, but the number 2 piece is not. It's just only a 1/4 inch in because we want it to be in the 2 block once it is sewn and folded upwards, if that makes sense. So here I have it again. I'm going to carefully flip it over, and then you'll see all of your printed lines, and that's where we're going to be sewing. So now I'm just going to sew on the paper, through both layers of fabric, along the line where 1 meets 2. I do recommend lowering your stitch length here. This is important. I usually go down to like 1.7 because when you rip the papers out, you don't want to rip your stitches at all. Now, in my last video about this, I did a back stitch and I was told that was wrong. So I'm kind of giving it a try without back stitching though. I will say I've done a little back stitch all other times before and it's turned out just fine. I don't know if that's because I use printer paper or what, but anyway, after you've stitched that line, if you fold up that number 2 fabric, it should cover up the entire number 2 spot. Then we're going to fold where your stitches are, just the paper, only fold the paper here, and we're going to trim this back so you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're trimming on the right side. If we were trimming over here, you would be cutting off all of your work and you don't want to do that. So trim this back so you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to just press it open, and it is okay to press on the paper. Now we're going to repeat the same process for the number 3 part. So you'll want to make sure that your piece is big enough. Place the piece you're adding wrong side facing up or right sides together with the other fabrics you already have attached. And again, when you fold it over, that's when it should be covering up that 3, not where you are placing it. It should only be like a 1/4 inch into the 3 when you are first sewing it on. So I did the same thing here. I stitched through the paper and all layers of my fabric. Now I'm folding it back on my stitch line and trimming it back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now when I fold the fabric open, it should cover up that 3 spot and I can press it in place. And next I will just continue on this process with 4 and 5. The main points here are just making sure your scrap is big enough that it'll cover up when folded open, and also that you're placing your fabrics right sides together when you're adding them on. You will notice as you start to add more on that you will be cutting through your other fabrics that you previously stitched on. And that is okay as long as you are just folding it along the stitch line that you just sewed. FPP patterns are made with this in mind, and it'll be okay, I promise. So here I have pieces 1 through 5 sewn on, and now I'm going to 6, 7, 8, and 9. These pieces are a little bit larger and they need to be going into that 1/4 inch seam allowance area on the outer edge. So I make sure to grab scraps that are large enough. Number 6, for example, I'm going to sew along that entire diagonal line that hits 2 and 5 there. Again, I'm placing this fabric right sides together with all of my previously sewn on fabrics and then stitching along that line. When it is folded up, it should cover up that number 6 there. So here's what that looked like after I stitched through the paper and my fabric. I will do the same thing, fold it back and trim it to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is what it looks like on the front, if you're wondering. Then I just pressed it open and repeated it with the other side. Luckily, I didn't have to seam rip at all, but I have found when you're seam ripping, your papers do get a little messed up, and maybe that's why it's better that I use a little bit of a thicker paper. You may also find that when you're folding, it's running into a previous stitch line, and that is okay. Just pull your paper gently back and rip the paper so that the stitches stay and you're able to fold it flat still. The more seams you have, the more you're going to see this. Also, when I'm doing the last outer pieces and stitches, I'm making sure to sew all the way into that 1/4 inch seam allowance. This just makes it a little neater when you're putting things together. Then once you have everything attached, you can go ahead and trim your entire block back to make it a block shape. This one did include the 1/4 inch seam allowance so that I can add multiple blocks together and use that line. So I'm just trimming back to that dotted line. Someone also told me I shouldn't cut paper with my rotary cutter in my last video, but sorry, I'm going to keep doing it. Look away if you don't like it, I guess. And last but not least, you can rip out the papers or keep them in. Some people prefer to keep them in as you attach blocks. It is totally up to you how you want to do this. I like to rip all mine out right away. This is actually my least favorite step because I don't like the feeling of paper. Just be careful not to rip your stitches, and this is why it's important to make sure that your stitch length is smaller. Let me know if you give it a try. I apologize, this was actually way harder to explain than I anticipated. Have fun and happy quilting.